Monday afternoon, and as punctual as can be, Dr. Pia Durkin is with us. She said 12:15, man, we're here, ready to go, and thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you so
I'm going to ask you to move that microphone up a little bit closer to your mouth there.
Okay. How's that?
There we go. Much better. Okay. And so what's new? Anything?
Well, I think what's great and new is I was in 2 schools this morning, and kids are using their science materials, teachers teaching their hearts out, and kids having a great 2.5 days that we're here before a wonderful holiday. So
it's been an eventful week in terms of the school department, an eventful week for you, an eventful week for the city of New Bedford, and you have decided to look elsewhere for employment. You're going to go somewhere else. You're not going to renew your contract, which is due to expire in 2019. You're, what, 4 years into your tenure, 1 year into your second contract. So you've decided at the end of the school year that you're going to move on. How come?
Well, as I said in my letter, it's very clear that essentially on a good day, when the conditions are right, the work is extremely hard to be able to consider change and make change happen. And when you see that support, and I've been watching this for several weeks, this was not a decision I woke up in the morning and said, okay, I'm going to do this. I have never not fulfilled a contract.
We're at Link. We wanted to show you how
I really did see that it would be best for me to move on and look at the conclusion of my 5th year, which will be this year, as one in which I could, for the next 6 months, solidify what we've done, particularly at New Bedford High School, particularly in our middle schools. As you know, we're redesigning, and be able to have a firm foundation for the people who are doing that very hard work. And I'm privileged to lead 2,200 staff members, and 1,100 of them are educators, to keep that work going.
So you get a sense that the incoming school committee in January is not supportive of your current agenda, and felt that it would really be futile for you to try to advance that agenda, knowing that it's not going to go anywhere, right? I guess.
Well, you know, as I said, when the conditions are right, it's hard. When the conditions are not right, it becomes impossible. And it is, you know, from current members issuing their concerns to new members coming on. The interesting thing is that the issues are very paramount for this school district, and I don't believe the issues have really been looked at. I came in as a change agent. I knew that. I embraced it. As you know, you have followed my tenure in the initial part. We had some really rough going. I stand by the decisions I've made. And it's interesting that when you look at those results, that they were not a key part of what the discussion has been. I've heard a lot about being decisive, and I am, being direct, and I am, but you have to make those decisions with the core interest for children. And though you absolutely need to know the adults and help them move along, and I am incredibly proud of the adults in this school system. If you remember, Barry, we didn't have a reading program. We didn't have a math program. We just got a science program. When I think of the incredible amount of professional development our teachers had to have, and how they are doing such good work because they were finally given the tools for that, that's how I measure my success. That people have reinvented what they normally did and believe in that vision that New Bedford will become a truly excellent school system. I was out and about this weekend in the neighborhood and met a student who came up to me and said, Dr. D, you know, I'm at the high school. And I said, oh. I said, and what are you doing? He said, I'm in an AP course. I said, you are? I said, and how is it? He said, oh, it's hard, but it's cool. And I said, and why are you in an AP course? How did you get in that? He said, oh, my teacher, Ms. So-and-so, said, you have to really try this. He goes, and I'm really glad that I'm doing it. I don't believe that would have happened 5 years ago. I don't believe that we would have opened up the access to all kids, whether they came from neighborhoods where supported a lot of education, as well as to kids who have English language learner needs, kids with disabilities, kids who have represented for me a lot of challenges. And I believe we've lifted all kids to make this a better school system.
I want to go back and talk about some of your accomplishments in a moment, but have you heard from any of the school committee members since your statement was released last week about your resignation?
No, I think they've been fairly busy, so I really haven't. No, I did speak to a few members who were going off, Mr. Nobrager and Dr. Finnery, as well as Mr. Livamento. Mr. Livamento will be remaining, and they were extremely supportive and understanding. The current committee had been for a long time very supportive of my efforts. As you know, both Dr. Finley and Mr. Nebrega ran a second term, and though that was their own volition, it sure helped to have that stability for my second connection to be able to keep the work moving forward. Their stability is an important thing in gateway cities. It's a very important piece for building that superintendent school committee team.
I was just going to ask, have you heard from Mayor Mitchell at all?
No, I believe he's very busy. I've sent, I've basically done some electronic chatting with him, but not yet. But I'm sure, he's got a lot on his mind. He's running the whole city, and I'll continue to run the school system.
So, in terms of your plans, what are you going to do? I mean, we all know that the DESE is looking for a new commissioner with the untimely passing of Mitchell Chester. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Well, at this point, I'm really going to sit for a bit, and I always believe you don't react to things. And as pensively as I took this decision, I'll look for my next opportunity. I do know I want to be able to continue contributing to particularly equity for children and making sure that needs are being addressed. I've done a lot of work with other superintendents. There is something about being in the seat. This is my 13th year as a superintendent, to be able to offer advice as well as counsel and help coach in that area. I believe I have a lot to say about the story of New Bedford and the team that I've been able to assemble, an incredible team of principals who took risks that they didn't have to take. And I say that from people who have been in the system for a long time and took on harder assignments and said, I can do this. If you support me, I can change what I'm doing in one school and make that happen in another school. People like Tammy Morgan and Karen Tredup, who's reorganizing Kearney School. People who stepped up to the plate when I tapped them on the shoulder and they said, you think I should be a principal? And people like Maria Reedy, who was an extraordinary math teacher. People like Kim Marshall, who worked at the Taylor School for so many years and is now our principal of Rodman, and Maria is principal at Brooks. Rafaela DeFigurito, who's our principal at Taylor. I'm incredibly proud of these people. Darcy Youngst, who now has 2 schools under her belt, working with DeVals and Congdon, and as you probably know, the Congdon School had some of the highest growth in the state, showing our EL students to be achieving so much more. That's what I take to my heart and soul as the great people who are here, who didn't sit by and say, well, I'll kind of see what this new superintendent is doing, but who jumped in feet first and said, I'm in. I may not be doing it that well, but can you help me? And we helped each other. They helped me become a better superintendent, and I hope to believe that I helped them become better principals.
So retirement is not in your immediate plans?
Oh, no. No, I've got, first of all, I'm fortunate to have a incredibly supportive family, and as long as good health blesses all of us, as you know, Barry, I have a number of things I want to be able to accomplish, including writing about this experience in New Bedford. I think we've got some lessons learned, and I think we have a lot to share with other gateway cities and urban education individuals. I think people are always looking for, what are the strategies you used? What can we replicate? What would you do differently? So my Deputy Superintendent, Jason Falco, and I have plans for telling that story, and I know there are a lot of people who'd want to hear it.
So what is it about your personality, Dr. Durkin? Because when I ask people about Dr. Durkin, you seem to be a lightning rod. There are those like myself who think you've done a fantastic job and wish you would stay, and there are others who say, I can't wait for her to get out of town, I'll pack her bags. And when I ask people why, what is it? What I get mostly is that your leadership style, that's what I hear, quote unquote, leadership style, and I've never really been able to get a full explanation of what exactly that means. But why do you think you rub so many people the wrong way?
I think it's, well, when I look at some of the leaders that I've espoused to, both female and male leaders, I do believe, and the literature supports this, that there is a difference with female leaders. I'm a CEO. I have 2,200 staff members, 26 buildings, $130+ million budget. And given where New Bedford was, and in some places where it still is, it requires a great deal of decisiveness as well as respect and civility to get the changes moving. It was shown for years how New Bedford didn't change. I do believe the sense of style, as some people put it, is, men are tough decision makers and they can be aggressive, and women, when they're being the same way are viewed very differently. I do think there.
Your B word enters the picture, right?
I would refrain from that, but it's interesting to me that as you probably know, Barry, I supervise directly principals. I don't supervise teachers. And of course, I supervise my central office administrators. And when I look at some of the things that came to me that people thought I was doing, I do believe there is almost like a brush fire as to what Durkin is doing. So I can give one example. I was very much early on in my tenure, right after the no confidence vote. You probably remember that. And one of my principals called me and said, Pia, you got to hear what I'm hearing, what I've been told. A teacher went up to her and she said, people are saying Dr. Durkin is coming into this school on Saturdays and putting notes on our lesson plans telling us that they're all wrong. I mean, that couldn't have been further from the truth. First of all, as you probably could imagine, my first 6 months here, I was trying to figure out what plans we needed to do. But I don't supervise teachers. I work with principals so that they can supervise teachers in a very focused and helpful way.
So you weren't sneaking into the school building?
No, I really wasn't doing that. And if I was, I probably wouldn't have lasted much longer. I give that example because it's almost kind of humorous. Mm-hmm. But it's sad what people think. So, for example, I was in 2 schools today, and I was with the principal. And our discussion with the principal, my discussion with each of those principals was, what support are you going to give that teacher to be able to reach the kids in a better way? What questions are you going to ask her or him? What kind of professional development do you think you need to give? Because the kids were not getting it. And I think what has also happened in this system, and I was told this fairly directly when I came on, that teachers never got observed. That teachers were told they did a good job. And yes, they may have kept kids quiet, but for the real feedback on their craft, they really weren't given good pointers or what I would call high-impact feedback. So I could come into your classroom, Barry, and I could say to you, well, you need to move the overhead projector, or, it would be good if you had the lesson plan posted for the kids, or make sure you have all the materials ready for the kids to take when you start the lesson. That's what we call low-impact feedback, and that's like a managerial type of piece. But when I say to you, Barry, I think you need to ask some more high-level questions. Instead of asking, what color was the flag and where did it fly? What about, why do you think the flag was flown half-mast? How do you feel about that flag flying half-mast, about the person for which it was? How do you look at these 2 pieces of text, as I saw a grade 7 classroom doing, about John Adams, and determine which one is the real truth? One was an editorial about John Adams, and one happened to be about his own diary. How do we know what is the truth? Getting kids to really critically think. Those are high-impact recommendations to help our kids become the brilliant critical learners of tomorrow.
And that's what the consumer of education is demanding, the parents, the taxpayers.
Absolutely. And when I say to families, what do you want for your children? They want them to be able to have a good life, to have a happy life, to contribute to society. But we want our children getting into the most competitive colleges, and if not that, being able to continue their education beyond high school in an area that they can be passionate about, love, and excel at. And those are, we need not only the basic skills, but we need those skills to be higher order learners and to be able to be critical thinkers. And so when we teach reading, I was in a 3rd grade class the other day, and if you could just indulge me, and this brilliant 3rd grader, they were working on inferencing. And I always ask kids, what are you working on and what are you doing? And this young 8-year-old said to me, I'm doing inferencing. I said, what does that mean? He said, that means I have information in my head and I'm reading what is on the page, and I get to form my own information about what I think about it. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. That teacher had been able to give those kids the skills they needed to read beyond what was on the written page, but what was written between the lines and beyond the lines. And fantastic work. That's exactly what we want our kids to read. When they read one of your posts or an editorial in the Standard Times, we want them to delineate what they believe in, what they don't, and why. And those are a lot of the issues that we're dealing with at in most of our classrooms, particularly in the middle school redesign, particularly in our high school, as we do what we call evidence-based teaching and learning. And I don't want to get into the jargon, but it basically is helping our children tackle materials and grapple with them, that they become excited about their learning and want to do more. Because we know our graduation rate is at 70%. I am proud of that accomplishment, but it is not nearly where it should be. And part of that graduation rate is for our students to enter post-secondary education, whether it be technical school, the military, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, and to be able to enter without the need for remediation. We are seeing at our high school the incredible amount of dearth of math learning, because, in fairness, it began in middle school and it began in elementary school, where teachers did not have the right tools to have our kids learn beyond computing and be able to problem solve. Math is only as good as how I can figure out what I'm doing day to day with math, not just a list of computation examples.
So address the teacher turnover, because I want to get into that a little bit, because that's one thing that I hear from listeners. Well, the teachers don't want to stay, but my experience, I worked in Fall River prior to coming here with Meg Mail Brown, who I'm sure you know well.
Oh, yes.
Was the superintendent there for most of my time. And same problem there. Constantly looking for new teachers in the urban districts. Cambridge is the same, Boston, Worcester, Lawrence, Lowell, any of the urban areas. So this is not unique to New Bedford. What is the problem in retaining teachers? Why is it so difficult?
Well, I think there are a number of factors. And to let you know that our retention data from the state, now it is 2 years old, and you could argue about the formula the state uses, but it is used for everyone. So we are compared fairly to places like Fall River, Dartmouth, Fairhaven, et cetera. Our retention rate is only about 2 percentage points below the state retention rate. And it's fairly good for an urban district when you compare apples to apples. So we are up there in the high 80s, close to the state average data. What is about retention is, do you want to do this kind of difficult work? Are you willing to take feedback? Because the day changes every day. We have nearly 100 students from Puerto Rico. I need to adjust my teaching when I have 1 or 2 of those students in my classroom to be able to make sure that they feel safe and that they're learning and that I assess them rather quickly. That's very different than from school districts where the absolute student body may be similar or the same. We deal with
teaching in Wellesley is considerably different than teaching in New Bedford.
And we have variations in our schools where we have the retention rate of students and we have turnover of students. Parker School has close to 40% of their students turnover every year, simply because families move from that school district and move to others. Now, that's not an excuse, but it does make it more challenging. So when you look at the urban environment and you look at, for me, there's no other place I'd want to work. And I have dozens and dozens and dozens of teachers who say the same thing. A good example about retention is our ESL students. I came here, there were 3 ESL teachers. Now there are 60. We didn't grow ESL students, English as second language students, but we did grow teachers because I knew I could not find, quote, 60 teachers right off the bat. They're one of the areas hard to fill. But what we were able to do was to go to that 3rd grade teacher, go to that 9th grade teacher and say, you're doing phenomenal work with these kids. Would you be willing to get recertified? We will coach you, support you. We will go through an academy, and we want to give you a job to work with the New Bedford kids that you love. And we did that. And those teachers have now been what I call reinvented. And there are ESL teachers doing extraordinary work where it's much easier to backfill a 3rd grade teacher or a 9th grade English teacher than it is for an ESL teacher. I do believe licensure has a great deal to do with it. Right now, and I'm a special ed certified administrator, when I took that test, it was very different than today. There are 5 different exams you need to be able to get your special education license. Never mind the expense, but the time to do that. The other piece is our waiver system has become far more stringent from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. It used to be easier to get a waiver. Barry wants to teach social studies. Okay, Barry, you have 12 credits. Sure, we'll put you in a classroom. We're very particular what we do. And now at the end of the year, I have to go to Barry and say to him, Barry, what did you do to make your progress towards certification happen? And the state will not give a 2nd-year waiver unless you have made what they consider substantial progress. So all those do contribute. I do believe you need to love this work to do it well, and you need to be open to feedback. I can point to teachers, principals who are being extraordinarily successful, and the reason why they are being successful and seeing the progress in their students is because they have taken feedback, constructive criticism, to change what they are doing. The kids are not changing. The families are not changing. They have the biggest assets in the world, and we love working with them. And I give this example all the time, but the teachers, what we're doing is changing. That's what's changing achievement. It's not changing that we got, a whole new crop of kids. They're all very different. And guess what? The kids are better this year. Teachers laugh when they hear that. The kids are the same. You change the names, you change the faces. It's what we do with them that makes a difference.
So the retention is only about 2% different from what's happening on the state level.
Yes.
So when you first, and I think where a lot of people make it confused on this is when you first began and the state was knocking on the door, you had the option to well, I guess you had 3 different options available to you. You chose what they call the nuclear option, and that was pretty much to clear house, right? Make everybody reapply for their jobs, and you replaced about 50% of the teachers and administrators. Some superintendents didn't do that. Others, like yourself, did. Why did you go that route?
Well, when you enter a district like New Bedford, you need to have a landscape of the seriousness of the problems. These problems have existed for more than 10 years. And I did a very deep dive into things that had been tried. And you can't play around the fringes. You really do need to get at the core of what is holding a school back. And the core is 2 things. It's about making the instruction better, and it's about having relationships with students in a culture that is positive and safe and supported by the administration. So going back to New Bedford High School, as difficult as that was, I stand by having done that. That school is a different school today. We have a long way to go. But I can say to you, just showing the NEASC accreditation, that never would have been possible 4 years ago if we had, if I had not gotten what I call a delay from NEASC, and I appreciate it greatly, to wait while we got the turnaround in place. We would have been denied the accreditation. There was no systems in place. There was very little work with schedules. Teachers were trying their very best. Attendance was at an all-time low. There was very little monitoring of students. It was probably one of our biggest challenges. And there had been the achievement gap law. There are colleagues of mine that have used every ounce of that achievement gap law. Coming into a situation where you have an abysmally, pervasively, chronically underperforming school district, you use every tool you can. And I believe it was the right thing to do, and I stand by the results. Our graduation rate is up. Yes, we have a long way to go for achievement, but we are poised to be able to make that foundation actually happen. You don't go up 14 percentage points in advanced placement exams unless, and include over 400 test takers if the instruction is not changing.
How much time have you got left?
I have a few more minutes.
All right. Let's talk about a couple of real quick things. The test scores are up. Some would argue, they say, well, the numbers have been jimmied and so on and so forth, and so the results are really not the same. We went up one year, back down the next year. So where are we exactly in terms of the test scores and how we test them?
Well, what's the challenge is, and I would take issue with, we know we have a new MCAS 2.0, so it's very difficult to compare from last year to this year, and we couldn't. And that's challenging for the entire state. DSE has been very clear that you cannot compare those test scores. But I can say to you, and it is a different test, and it's a more challenging test, I can tell you what is very affirming and what I want the community to know and be assured at, that though our numbers where students are meeting expectations and exceeding them is not as high as we'd like, we have over half our students in that middle group called partially meeting expectations. We do not have them in the lowest group, which is not meeting expectations.
What is the big challenge there?
The big challenge is doing the work in a deeper way. So if I'm partially meeting expectations, I was with the principal this morning, kids left out certain parts of their writing exercise because they didn't know certain vocabulary words. We actually analyzed it. Those vocabulary words will be part of writing. Those students will definitely move to meeting expectations. It's looking at the data as to why our students miss the mark, getting them over that hurdle. The hurdle is not that great. If we look at how we can teach writing more deeply, how we can really analyze why our students are failing in math problems, why our kids may not be reading to that critical extent I gave before, we are going to move those kids to not only meeting expectations, but exceeding them. And that's what teachers and principals are looking at now. So I'm very confident that when we look at next year with the MCAS 2.0, we are going to see changes of that middle group, not partially meeting expectations, moving them over that hurdle to meeting expectations.
So you look at a community like Chelsea or even Dartmouth or maybe Fairhaven or whatever, and maybe the test scores will be better. How much do social issues and social problems carry into the schools and maybe impact all of this? I mean, in other words, are these kids getting the kind of study time at home? Do they all have computers? Or, what 2 o'clock comes and boom, it's over, where some kids go home and they're studying and getting reinforcement from the parents?
That's a really excellent question, Barry. First of all, we're thrilled that we have a one-to-one initiative at the high school. Thanks to the generosity of Dr. Jacobson. I spoke to him last week. That project has absolutely taken off, and our kids are doing math 24/7 because they take their laptops home and they're able to actually collaborate with each other and talk with their teacher. How is this math going? And we are thrilled that our failure rate at the high school dropped nearly 10 percentage points. That doesn't happen overnight, but it shows what our kids are learning. I can say to you why we need a portfolio of different options for our students. We have a number of schools that have an extended year, that have an extended day. The Jacobs Schools has that, the Gomes School, Hayden McFadden, Parker School. We need more time with our kids. We also need to look at those emotional, what we call challenges, and deal with them. We've been able to put in place wraparound coordinators who not only work with kids in school, but the families. And to be able to know that our families have many challenges. They also have assets, and to be able to work with them on how we can extend how what we're doing in school can be brought up at home. And looking at what we call that social emotional learning. We're doing a massive curriculum that our teachers are working very hard at, that our psychologists and social worker, student adjustment counselors are. It's called the social thinking curriculum. It means that I need to regulate my own behavior. I need to be able to manage my own emotions, and I need to have choices when I may get upset with myself or something that happened to me at home. So we have a number of places where we have what's called reset classrooms. Little ones come in after or even our middle school students come in after a weekend, and they may have had a tough time at home that had nothing to do with school. Rather than go immediately into that kindergarten classroom, they're sitting with someone to get their act together, maybe do a little bit of work, calm down, get assurances that you're going to have a very successful day, and then go into the classroom. A lot of these kids are dealing
with drug addiction and violence and various other issues at home on the weekend, and then coming in on Monday and expecting to...
seeing what we call trauma events, whether it be domestic abuse, whether it be the substance abuse issues. We have 100 students coming from Puerto Rico, and their stories are gut-wrenching. I ended last year with 880 students being served by the McKinney-Vento program, which you know is for our homeless students. Right now, on November 20th, we're over 1,000 students. And those children have very unique needs. They're not all in shelters. There are some who are doubled up. Our students from Puerto Rico, we're developing what we call trauma-sensitive schools. That doesn't mean we're therapists, doesn't mean we're, pretending to be psychoanalysts, but it does mean we build teams of teachers with our clinical staff to help notice the signs and help that student feel comfortable. So for two reasons. Number one, to really give that child some strategies of how they can cope in a new environment that represents a colder environment, if at all, as well as all the things that may be different, but also to make sure that our teachers are not alone, that I am part of a team. And when I get this third child coming in who has been the victim of domestic abuse or seen things that a 6-year-old never should have seen, I have someone to really work with and help that child get on track to do the learning.
Well, I'm sorry. One of the issues that I'm hearing a lot from parents too is they still have a concern with discipline in the schools. Now, my understanding of this is that really the local level is limited now in how it can deal with a lot of these issues, right? I mean, you've got state and federal guidelines, and I know the various groups on the national level have fought against schools and suspension rates and expulsion and all of that. So really there's a limited list of options available for you to deal with discipline problems at this point?
I wouldn't say that at all. We take very seriously the issues that are involving anyone putting hands on an adult or a child, anything involving drugs, anything involving weapons. We are clearly that's taking
criminal
that serious.
Activity.
Absolutely.
But I mean disruptive behavior, swearing, loud behavior.
You're absolutely right. We are seeing a real shift in what we call office referrals, that students are developing that sense of what we call the culture and expectations in classrooms. But it comes from ownership of that. It's very interesting. When you talk to students who may have had a misstep, they'll always say, well, when I was in Mr. So-and-so's classroom, we don't do that. But in Mr. So-and-so's classroom, we do. Why is that? The expectations aren't there. I do believe our buildings are safe. We are productive. We have issues. When you have 13,000 children coming in each day, you've got to make sure that you set that norm and be able to reach that. But largely, 85% of our students know what they have to do. They make mistakes. All middle schoolers do. High school students do. So do elementary kids. But you're always going to have that 5 to 7% that do need a far more intensive approach, perhaps a pull-out approach, perhaps more involvement with the family, where what I mentioned about the wraparound managers. But I do want to say, and I know data at times has been discounted, which I have to say to all members of this community, it's an important benchmark. We had nearly 10,000 people take a survey, and the survey is done, it's done every year, and it's gone directly to what we call the Panorama Group. It doesn't come to us. We only get the results. And when you see data that says, how often do you feel that the school has a welcoming environment, which to me does mean a safe environment, 94% of our families are saying that's welcome, up from 78% just last year. When you ask, and this is a very important piece that I take in my heart and soul, how much do you think the New Bedford Public Schools are improving? 78% of our families are saying they do believe it's improving, as opposed to 70% last year. So that data is looked at. I know it's a snapshot, but I believe this community has the absolute way possibility of becoming a truly great school district. And I do believe we have the people in there to do it.
Graduation rates are up?
They are.
And dropout rates are down.
That's right. We have a long way to go with that because we need to keep making sure our students have pathways, which means different ways to get our kids to that finish line. And looking at that, we're going to be doing a redesign method at the high school to really get more stakeholders involved, to really look at what is the aspiration our students have. We know advanced manufacturing is an important job here. We know medical technology is. We know clean energy is. Why aren't we developing more pathways for our kids to go into that?
Well, that leads to my next question, and we've been talking about this on the air. California is investing, I think, somewhere around $260 million to take a look and move in the direction of providing more students with vocational educational training. And you see the long lines. You compete against New Bedford Voc. You see the long lines of students that want to go in that direction. They feel college isn't for them. It's not what they want, but they want some type of training beyond high school. So to that end, what can we do to try to meet that need? And I've heard there are actually some 30,000 jobs out there that start you at $55,000 a year and up in the trades, and there are just not enough kids to fill those positions.
You're absolutely right, and that's why we're looking at this aspirational way of looking at how we can increase the advanced manufacturing and the other areas I mentioned. The other part that's important is we are looking into developing a culinary program at the high school, a Chapter 74 money. I think I spoke to several, I'm happy to contribute to the wonderful restaurants we have in the neighborhood, and basically there's not enough people to be able to fill those jobs. We also have done some creative things with Bristol County Community College, and we're thrilled that we had students who not only got their high school diploma last year and working with Dr. Douglas, but also were able to become a CNN, a certified nurse assistant. We're also able to become a line cook, and the best for our students to become paraprofessionals within the school system, to get on a ladder of becoming a teacher. That is exactly what we mean about having alternative pathways to have our kids succeed. So generally,
when we've discussed this before, I guess middle school is where kids start to lose their way a little bit, and some of them are looking at college and maybe not interested, and they don't see what they want out there. Is that the place to really start addressing this?
I couldn't agree more. We are developing, we had our Rally for the Future. We're having all our middle schoolers, and we're really starting, I'm going to say to you, Barry, it's not only at 6th grade, possibly 4th and 5th grade, to take a look at what are the pathways we have in middle school that leads to high school. Our middle schools have been wanting. That's why we did the redesign plans, and I was delighted that our teachers stepped up. We did them ourselves. State didn't come in. We own them, and we developed them to be able to give our teachers more planning time, more collaborative time, to develop teams of teachers, to be able to have a personalized learning system available, as well as extending our advanced learning system. All these are great things for families to know we have as options. But we need to get our families into the schools. So I would say, if you don't mind, as I'm on the air, to please call our schools. If you don't, call me. We will set up an absolute tour during the school day, not before or after, for you to see the real picture of how our schools are, and that includes the high school. And I know Headmaster Coelho is very eager to make sure that families have that entree into seeing and shadowing a student during the course of the day. We're very proud of what we're doing, and we're very proud of the options that we have.
When the mayor was in last Wednesday, I asked him a day before your letter came out that you're going to be leaving. I asked the mayor about the evaluation process, because you had initiated that with your first evaluation report, your assessment of your evaluation. I asked him what he thought, and pretty much everything he said was positive. The one issue that I could get him to say that he had some difficulty with was the budget process with you, and he said it's a contentious process. He said more contentious than it needs to be. Now, just my humble opinion, Meg Mayo Brown was the same way, and I used to talk to her about that. I would rather have an advocate out there fighting for more money for the kids than politicians saying, well, here's what we got to cut in order to, do this out of the other thing. So that process with the budget, I mean, how do you address that? How do you feel about that?
Well, I've addressed the budget the same way I've done the last 4 years, and I will be as I present soon the FY19 budget. $130.9 million is a lot of dollars. However, I've addressed the budget based on student needs. In my years prior to coming here, the budget was, the superintendent, I believe, was given a number and fit it in and figure out what you need now that you have that number. Though we have to be very conscious of the constraints on the city, we absolutely have to have a student-based need budget. And that probably, I wouldn't call it contentious, I would probably call that a difference of opinion. And with that, I'm very pleased this past year, for 3 years, New Bedford has been given a letter based on the end-of-year report, which is usually completed by the end of October, that shows in January that the previous year, New Bedford did not meet its minimum net school spending. That is not good. Minimum net school spending, as you could probably understand, is exactly what it is, minimum.
That gets bumped. You're going to have to pay that eventually, right?
Exactly. It has to be 5%. Now, we've just about made it like a little bit below 5%, but we need the minimum. And with the help of Andrew O'Leary, our business manager, and working with Ari Skye, the chief financial officer, and really looking at what are the costs and getting that gap narrowed that we will meet in minimum net school spending, and hopefully seeing it go above minimum net school spending, that has helped a great deal. We simply can't work from a specific number. And I can well appreciate the mayor's constraints and his difficulties. He's got to run the whole city. But if we don't invest in education and we don't see those services coming to kids, then I believe the whole city needs to be lifted.
Well, if that's being contentious, I'd wear that proudly as a badge. We've only got a couple of seconds left, but I wanted to, for those who have been following, we're speaking with Dr. Pia Durkin, by the way, the superintendent of schools. I wanted to ask you about the unfortunate events of last week. Newly elected member of the school committee arrived at your office and has made an issue over not being able to meet with you one-on-one because your assistant was involved in that meeting as well. Is that standard practice with new members coming in?
I have made it a practice that anytime we have new members elected to the school committee, I generally give them a little breathing time and then call them to see if they'd like to come in and just chat. And basically on procedural issues, you know, how I communicate with committee members. They are not sworn in directly yet. So, but giving them materials, the policy handbook, the procedural handbook, copy of the budget, and through all of that. I've been doing that for the last 4 years, and that is not different. I can't comment since it's an ongoing police matter, but I can say that safety and a civil demeanor is probably the most important assets we need to have as officials. That's a non-negotiable for me. I have 100 people working at PRAB, which is our central office. I have 26 schools with 13,000 children and their families entrust me with their safety. I have to be concerned not only for myself, but for those people. So the police will be working with that issue.
All right. So in terms of the meetings themselves, it's not unusual for you to have somebody else in the meeting?
I generally have my deputy superintendent with me because there's lots of information you want to share. And there's no reason why that wouldn't happen. We're a team effort. And believe it or not, Barry, I can't have every piece of information at my fingertips. So it's always good to have someone with there. And it's not only just with school committee members. It sometimes happens frequently when I meet with the mayor, as well as when I meet with other officials in the community.
Was that stated going into the meeting? Did this member know that there would be somebody else there, or was it stated prior to the meeting that it would be a one-on-one with you?
I can't recall. I know my assistant called and said, would you like to meet with Dr. Durkin? And there was no issue with that. That's my standard way of operating.
All right. So, and this was a meeting then that was arranged by your office.
Absolutely.
For him
Yes.
to come. Wow, we've covered a lot. I'm not sure if we got it all. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we say thank you for coming in? Or
Oh, well, I want to thank you, and I want to assure the community. The work that's been done in New Bedford definitely has deep roots. It needs to be able to thrive and flourish, and I have full confidence in the people who are in our schools to be able to bring that forward. And I will work my very hardest between now and June. I'm so grateful for the people who have given me so much support in this, and we will move this district forward and give it the excellence it needs.
Dr. Pia Durkin, appreciate your time today. Thank you for coming in, and happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
Happy Thanksgiving to you. Great time to be grateful.
Look forward to being in touch more before you leave. All right, let me take a break. We're going to come back and reset things. Stay with us. You're listening to 1420 WBSM.